ENDER Magnolia is a Metroid Vania set within a dark fantasy world. Artificial lifeforms known as homunculi have been corrupted and are now attacking humans. Stay tuned as we review ENDER Magnolia: Bloom in the Mist. The game begins with a cutscene of a homunculi being created. They're artificial beings that were designed to coexist with humans. However, they were exposed to toxic fumes that corrupted their minds and made them attack humans instead. Homunculi are now seen as mutants, well, most of them anyways. You play the role of Lilac, who after waking up has lost parts of her memory. Lilac is an attuner, which allows her to get through to rogue homunculi and remove the corrupt thoughts that plague them. Lilac wants to find out who she keeps seeing in her memories, what caused the homunculi's corruption, as well as see the kingdom rejoice in liberation. At the start of the game, all Lilac can do is run, jump, dodge and use a healing ward to restore HP. Lilac gains abilities by homunculi lending their powers to her after she's turned their minds back to normality. The first homunculi that you save is Nola, and in return she gives you access to her sword attack. But Nola also wants to help you on your journey and will accompany you throughout the story, as well as any other homunculi that can be rescued. Homunculi that join your party aren't just giving you access to their abilities, they're by all means your companions. They'll talk to you throughout your journey, but they'll also have goals and questions they want answered. The game has a giant map system in which all areas are interconnected. Once you've explored an area and discovered all of its items and secrets, it will turn blue. Otherwise it will stay grey, letting you know there's more to see. Now let's discuss the game's combat. Enemies have a health bar as well as a bar underneath which measures their breaking point. Once enemies have sustained enough break damage, they'll stagger for a few seconds, allowing you to get some free damage in. Enemies will use ranged, melee and status effects to overwhelm you. The dodge button is going to be your best friend and you're going to have to make good use of it. The combat is very similar to a Souls game because you'll need to wait for an opening, get some damage in and then go back on the defensive. Whilst you can't just spam the evade button as you'll be hit, the window is pretty generous. For the first few hours, enemies' attacks are highly telegraphed and pretty slow, but enemies eventually get quicker, have the ability to kill you in seconds and have full screen attacks. I will go into more detail on the combat a little later in the review. But what about the platforming? Well, the platforming as well as Lilac's movement is incredibly smooth, which is complemented by her animations. She can double jump into an air evade and this makes quick work of getting around the map. Enemies will also be present, so you'll have to think on the fly when traversing. You can easily be killed by locking into a jumping animation, only for an enemy to fill you with bullets. You'll also come across respites. These allow Lilac to restore healing charges, act as a fast travel point, and plenty of other features that we'll discuss later. These act very similar to a bonfire in a Souls game, as all enemies will respawn after you've rested. Your companions aren't the only people that you'll be speaking to. There are several zones in the world that act as a hub. Now these small towns have all been impacted by the homunculi crisis, but you won't find any enemies here. Some NPCs can be given quest items and you'll be given a reward in return. Now these aren't the same as a typical RPG where an NPC will ask you to help them out and you'll get a quest tracked in your journal. Instead you'll come across quest items in the world and will have to give it to the right person. It's usually pretty obvious who you need to give it to, as each item will have a brief description. This leads us on to story progression, as there's no quest marker that tells you where to go. You're free to explore the world at your own discretion. The map is big, there are plenty of branching paths to take and equipment to be discovered. Now some areas will be locked off as an ability is needed to clear the way. If that happens, just head to another zone that's greyed out. Remember that the map goes blue when you've cleared it and found all the items, so it's pretty easy to work out where you need to go next. But what is a Metroid Vania without boss battles? There are so many boss battles in this game and they range from easy to challenging. Some can two-shot you and others can deplete your health bar in seconds. I initially thought the game's difficulty was fine. Not too difficult, but not too easy. But that changes when you get to the halfway point. Your training wheels are removed and the bosses will not pull their punches. Every single boss has unique mechanics. Some will summon more enemies and you'll need to make quick work of them. Some cover the majority of the screen, making dodging them tough, and others will try and slow you down with status afflictions. A few of them did frustrate me and my monitor and PlayStation did receive some verbal abuse. While some of them are difficult and pissed me off, I found them all to be relatively fair. I found that after dying a few times I could fight them without taking too much damage, and it always feels good knowing that you're improving. The bosses have been excellently crafted, and furthermore the combat as a whole is perfect. The devs could not have done a better job if they tried. We also need to discuss the other joys of ENDER Magnolia in your abilities and equipment. You have access to over 25 abilities that can be equipped in your hotbar. They range from primary, auto, cooldown and pressure. Now you can mix and match these abilities into 4 hotbar slots, but can only have one of each type. So you wouldn't be able to have 4 auto abilities, for example. Your abilities can also be buffed to make them more powerful by using the SP bar in the form of attuner arts. These are essentially special attacks that tear normal enemies apart and do sizable damage to bosses. You have to defeat enemies to refill your SP bar though. You can't just keep keep spamming these over and over again. Lilac also makes use of equipment and relics. Equipment provides stat buffs, add special effects to your parries, as well as restoring health or SP. Relics add further buffs to Lilac. For example, my build included a relic that boosted my pressure attacks by 30%, recovered my HP when attacking, and reduced enemy damage by 10%. There are loads of equipment and relic pieces to be found in the world, and a variety of ways that you can play. For example, in one zone I focused on setting status afflictions, so I equipped a bunch of relics that focus on status effects, as well as setting an auto ability that stuns enemies. If you're struggling in an area or with a certain boss, make sure to go back and tinker with your build. I changed my relics several times throughout the game, and remember, they're there to make your life easier. When you kill a boss, your health and healing ward charges are restored, which was another nice touch. When you're halfway through a zone, the last thing you want to do is use a respite and respawn all of the enemies. Oh, and yes, there is a parry mechanic in the game. If you press the evade button just before you get hit, you won't take any damage. I equipped a piece of equipment that shoots back at the enemies every single time I parried. Now the window is very generous, so if you're thinking you need to be an Elden Ring speedrunner, well, you don't. If you die, you'll be respawned at a respite. You don't lose any of your currencies or abilities, and you're always in touching distance of where you died, so there's really no drawback in dying at all. We also need to discuss all the locations that you'll be visiting. There are more than 10 zones that form the entire map, and they all have their own theme and enemies. This zone is a set of ruins under the sea, so yes, you'll be swimming and battling fist-based homunculi, but just look at the range of blues that are used here and the overall aesthetic. It's just nice to look at. The underwater combat handles just as well as if you're on land, but watch out for these fish as they do big damage. There's the Crimson Forest, a giant maze, but it looks so good with all the luminescent colours. There are portals scattered around that will teleport you to random locations, as well as prehistoric looking homunculi to add to the fantasy forest feel. Then you've got the Arcane Factory, which houses retro looking homunculi that look like robots. It has that gritty iron feel, as well as these annoying laser bots. This area had some bosses that sent me back to the respite location repeatedly, but we did prevail, baby. What I'm trying to say is a lot of effort and attention to detail went into each location, and this is only a few of them. Every other zone received the same amount of attention, and they all look fantastic. I mentioned earlier that there are no quest markers and no NPCs that will tell you where to go, but I didn't mention the story. The story is vaguely told through flashback cutscenes as Lilac starts to regain her memory, but it's mostly told by speaking to your companions. You'll have the option to talk to them while at a respite, and they'll talk with each other whilst providing some banter. There are points in the story where they'll stop and open up a conversation. Now there is no voice acting, just on-screen text to read. They made a wise decision to keep the dialogue short and sweet. Now I do prefer voiced characters, but it definitely works here. And we haven't even spoken about the music, guys. After an hour of playing the game, I was ready to download the OST on Apple Music. I don't download music from games. Most of my playlists are filled with deep and tech house, so I did a little bit of research. The composers of the game's soundtrack are a Japanese band called Millie. They've been working on game soundtracks for years and also made the game's first soundtrack in ENDER. But yeah, the music is a 10 out of 10. I know it's a little later in the video, but yes, this game is a sequel to ENDER, which released in 2021. I was going to purchase ENDER, but to my surprise, I already have it. It was free on PS Plus last year, so take a look as you probably have it as well. And if people want, I'd be happy to review that game too at some point this year. Once you've completed the game, you respawn at a respite just before the final sequences, so you're free to pick up any missed collectibles or items, as well as do some trophy hunting. There are also multiple endings, so you can play through the game again if you wish. Just note that there's no new game plus, so you can't bring your OP builds along for the ride. ENDER Magnolia Bloom in the Mist took me 27 hours to see the final credits. I couldn't believe how much content was packed into this indie title. None of it is fluff or padding either. The game gets everything right and is one of the best games I've played in some time. The combat, art style, music, story and the progression, the devs knocked this one out of the park. A week ago I'd never even heard of the series, and now I want more of it. I paid £18 or $22 for the game, which is crazy considering it's an indie title. It costs a third of a AAA release but arguably has more content. I enjoyed every single minute of my 27-hour playthrough and hope that the devs can implement a new game plus feature as well as some DLC. I'd be happy paying for any of these features, so I do hope that the game does well. But what score am I giving it? Well, it's a 9. I've never given a 9 on the channel, and I've not even given a 9 to too many games in general. I recommend this game to everyone. You'll have a great time. But don't just take my word. What did the other gaming outlooks have to say? It sits at mighty on OpenCritic with an average score of 90, it's overwhelmingly positive on Steam, and holds a score of 84 on Metacritic. It's fair to say that gamers enjoyed Bloom in the Mist. Ladies and gents, subs and non-subs, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. You've heard it all a million times. All of my socials can be found in my description. And remember, I'll never be a real YouTuber until I've released an apology video. Or 2. That's all, guys. Peace out. Senor Donut ASMR coming real soon. Nah, fuck that. We got more fucking game reviews to make, baby. Let's get it.